That's what we're unpacking tonight on Compassion in Action. From overuse to microdosing, and whether psychedelics can help us heal. We've got an expert here to break it all down.
Welcome to Compassion in Action, where advocacy meets real change, fighting for justice, equity, and healing, because every voice matters.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Compassion in Action. I'm your host, Angela, co-founder of the Georgia Medical Cannabis Society, and I'm so glad you're joining us for another powerful and purposeful conversation. This series is all about centering voices that are bringing education, advocacy, and real-world impact to the cannabis and plant medicine space. And tonight's guest is doing just that. Joining us is Megan Mbengue, RN, better known to many as the Trusted Canna Nurse. She's a registered nurse, cannabis psychedelic educator, and the founder of Trusted Canna Nurse, a platform built on evidence-based education for patients, providers, and dispensary teams. Megan's work bridges clinical insight with compassionate care, helping people safely explore plant medicine through education, intention, and science. From navigating cannabis overuse to integrating psychedelics like psilocybin, she brings honesty, clarity, and leadership to this space. Megan, welcome to Compassion in Action.
Hey, that's a cool intro. Thank you so much.
And one of these days, I'm going to pronounce it correct. I always get that.
You did great.
Psilocybin, right?
Oh yeah. Yep.
That, and then your last name, Bang.
You did great.
Thank you. So how are you?
I am doing wonderful. I'm so excited to be here.
Good. So I'm glad to have you here. So we'd like to start things off a little easy before we deep dive into everything. So I'm so excited to learn from you tonight. Yeah. So where are you located? You're in Southern California, right?
Yep. I am in the city of Claremont, which is the furthest east city in LA County.
Oh, okay. So near LA.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I tell you what, let's go ahead and get started.
Okay.
So one of the questions I want to ask you is, what defines problematic cannabis use, and how is it often misunderstood?
Okay. All right. Before we even jump into that, I have to say that I'm coming, why I'm coming at this topic like this, and where I'm coming from. And, when I started this business, it was to help people learn how to use cannabis and CBD the right way. And then along the way, learning about CHS and problematic use. And in the last couple of months, I would not be talking about this if I did not have an inbox full of messages or dozens of comments on my content every single day about how people are struggling with their cannabis use. So that's where this is coming from, is people coming to me on a daily basis explaining that it's creating problems for them. So it's not me policing anybody's, use or anything like that. It is coming with this is an issue and nobody's talking about it, because we're taught that this plant is 100% safe and doesn't cause issues and it's not addictive. But that's not what's happening in the real world. So that's where I'm coming from as we talk about this.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think it's a subject that's really needed as well. And we always are talking about cannabis from a perspective of medicinal and how the properties, how well they help us. But we never really talk about any type of uses where it may not be as great for us, or that's not for everybody. So that's what we definitely want to dive into that and find out more about what you have to say about that. So, and then going back to that question though, so what is problematic about cannabis and how is it so often misunderstood?
Mm-hmm. Okay. What is problematic about cannabis? I would say, that the problems that I see with cannabis and the cannabis industry is this narrative that it does not cause any harm, that it's completely benign. And if people have an issue with it, like that's their fault, or like it's a pesticide that they're consuming or something like that. So that's, I think that's, and then the more THC, the better. We see that a lot too. And that's just not true. So, so yeah, that's my answer to that. I don't know if that was where you're trying to go with that question.
Yeah. So when we're talking about that, we're talking about it being misunderstood. When we look at the amount of THC that people consume, are there issues with an overabundance of THC, or overuse of it for long term?
Yeah. So people can consume high doses of THC for a long period of time, and they never have any bad side effects. So if that's people listening to this and that's you, then like continue to do your thing. But if people are consuming high amounts for a long period of time, and maybe you're waking up with some nausea, maybe your anxiety and your depression are increasing, maybe your bank account is lower than you want it to be because you're spending more on your THC. And then maybe you're not getting the relief that you used to, and you keep having to go up on the dose. So the issues that I see with long-term heavy use of cannabis are increase in depression and anxiety. And what we see with the cannabinoid receptors is our cannabinoid receptors start to downregulate, or they decrease with heavy use. So there aren't as many receptors available. So then people are using higher and higher doses, and they're not as effective. So then they're essentially wasting their money. And then we see CHS, and that's when people develop CHS, many can't consume cannabis after having developed that. So we want people to be able to keep using this amazing medicine.
I do have a question for you. So CHS, can you tell our audience what CHS actually is?
Yeah, cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. It is this syndrome that develops, again, people who are using THC long term and heavy use. And it's this, what it is it's bouts of cyclical nausea, vomiting, severe abdominal pain, and oftentimes lands people in the hospital with severe dehydration because they're vomiting for days on end. And it starts with a prodrome phase, this phase of days to weeks to even years of these prodromal symptoms, these kind of like weird symptoms, the nausea, maybe increased anxiety, especially in the morning, and alcohol intolerance. People can't tolerate alcohol anymore. They have one drink and it makes them really, really sick. A lot of people with CHS will report that. And then even people in the withdrawal period, Cody and I have seen this a lot, that people will go on vacation and then they don't take their weed with them on vacation. And then on days 2 to 3, going without the weed, they're super sick. And they, some of them end up in the hospital under Cody's care because the withdrawal triggers a CHS episode. So it's a very complex, complicated syndrome.
Yeah. So I have a question. We're talking about CHS. That's a new term for me.
Okay.
So is that the same as what I've heard of is cannabis use disorder? Is that the same thing, or is it something different?
So this is very different from cannabis use disorder. Although people with CHS will sometimes be diagnosed or have cannabis use disorder because both are associated with heavy use. So it is different than that, and there is a genetic predisposition. Ethan Russo found this a couple of years ago. He did a research study and compared people with CHS to those without CHS, and found 5 specific genes that were different between the two groups. So it seems to be like a genetic predisposition combined with heavy use of THC. And then people can get really sick. And some people, there have been reports of deaths because people get sick, super sick, and can't recover or can't stop.
So what are the risks or patient outcomes that you have seen as a result of them having CHS?
The risks, the biggest risk I see are the vape pens. And if that's one thing I could change about this industry, would be doing away with the vape pens, because, you know, it's isolated, super high concentrated THC that I believe that our bodies weren't meant to be blasted with multiple times a day. And then that can throw off our endocannabinoid system, our master regulatory system. It can, like, you know, instead of bringing us back into balance, it's tilting the balance the other way and causing this. And so risk factors, the heavy use of the concentrates, and then or the people who are smoking daily for years at a time can develop it. And edibles too, but not as many people
with edibles.
It can happen with edibles, yes.
Okay, so it's vapes and edibles. You see it more with vapes than with edibles, or is it like a combination? Or
in our study that we did, we collected data from over 1,100 people with CHS, and the majority of people, you know, most people are using more than one form. They're smoking and vaping, smoking and doing it edible, you know, so they're doing combinations. But the highest proportion was people who said they smoked. So, and then those one, you know, some have been smoking for 10, 20 years and then start to develop it.
So you find it more common with someone who has had a more extensive use of it over a longer period of years than someone who may just say have started maybe several months of usage.
There was some trends that, like, people who are smoking, you know, smoking is obviously a lower concentration of THC. It took a little bit longer for them to develop it, whereas those who were using the vape pens and the carts, it was a shorter time. And some people developed it in under 6 months.
Is this something that you can actually recover from, or is it something that where you would never be able to use cannabis again?
That's a hard one. So the medical recommendation is to stop using altogether. And people will say, you know, you can never use again without some degree of symptoms. However, most people try to use again, and a lot of people do find a sweet spot where they're able to use a little bit. You know, I just had somebody comment today that she had symptoms of CHS and now takes a low dose edible and doesn't have any issues. So it is like, recovery is possible. Most people do better when they abstain from it than if they continue to consume.
So are there any like long-term effects from this, even after they've stopped smoking?
That I don't know. I would imagine that there's probably like some long-term mental health effects with it, because, you know, people, cannabis was their medicine. A lot of them use both medicinally and recreationally, and it was their medicine and it was helping them, and now they no longer have that to help them. So I think that there could be some mental health effects physically once people recover. Some people will gain weight, and when they have CHS, a lot of people lose weight because they're not able to keep food down. So they're losing weight in an unhealthy way, and then they're able to gain the weight back and become a healthier weight. Some people were not underweight, but then they gain weight and then they end up a little bit heavier than they want to be. So, and I think that can be outside of CHS too, where people just stop using and may gain weight. But otherwise, people can generally make their bodies can recover and become healthy again. We do see down the line that certain foods and drinks may trigger some symptoms for people. Like alcohol still might trigger something years out from stopping.
So I do have a question for you as far as say the synthetic cannabinoids, like K2 or spice. and more recently, the lab-made compounds that are showing up in unregulated markets. What should patients and providers understand about the risk and the realities of synthetic cannabinoids compared to the natural plant-derived ones?
So with the synthetic cannabinoids, K2 and spice they're not on the market anymore, but Delta 8 is.
Okay.
Delta 8 is a
Yes.
synthetic cannabinoid.
Mm-hmm.
I think in Georgia, you guys have a lot of like the HHC, like that sort of thing. And what people need to know is that it's not natural. Like you have some, I say dudes because in my head they're all dudes and bros, like taking CBD, and then putting it in an acid to get it to convert to this cannabinoid that acts on our CB1 receptors. And the result of that process, you have like a lot of those residual chemicals may not be cleaned from the final product. So not only are you getting like this Frankenstein thing that may or may not occur naturally in the plant, you may be getting these brand new cannabinoids that nobody has ever heard of or have never been tested on humans, so we have no idea what they do. And then you may have residual chemicals. And so people should not be consuming, or I'm never recommending people consume synthetic or semi-synthetic cannabinoids.
So are you finding more with the patients that are utilizing more the synthetic or the natural plant that have CHS, or they're not a difference?
This is definitely a myth that people will say you can't get CHS from consuming like the whole plant. But you can, because people are getting it from smoking flower. People are getting it from consuming Delta 8 and HHC, and everything that's on the hemp market, which is semi-synthetic. So people are getting it from all the cannabinoids. Sorry, not all the cannabinoids. I don't want to say that. They're not getting it from CBD or CBG. They're getting it from the cannabinoids that activate our CB1 receptors.
Okay. So with that, so what should the consumers pretty much be cautious about when it comes to these different compounds that are, marketed out there?
They need to don't get your stuff from a gas station. Be cautious of the stuff that you get from like a hemp shop. And there are legit places online that sell THCA is going to be the closest thing to the natural plant, right? Because that is supposed to not be sprayed. It still might have pesticides in it, but it's not like Delta 8 that has been converted. THC is a natural marijuana plant. So if people need THC and they don't have legal access, then THCA may be the safer option compared to Delta 8 or even some Delta 9 products.
Okay. But still, I said, even though you're seeing the hemp stores, just be careful of where you're getting the THCA from, just in case it's they're spraying it or what have you. Just make sure that you know where the source.
Know where it's coming from.
Yeah. Okay, so when someone has CHS, what methods that you can use to kind of help them to overcome? Or now you presume they were using it for medicinal purposes. Say we're using it for medicinal purposes. Now they no longer have that medicine. What can they do?
Yeah. So when people develop like problematic use, what they say is problematic use, they're wanting to cut their use, and they're struggling maybe to make it through tolerance breaks, so they're not getting the effects that they want, then that's when microdosing can be a really effective tool to help people. And this is something that we do, and we did a small study almost 2 years ago now on 8 people. We took them through a tolerance break group program, and we used microdosing as one of the tools to help. And all 8 were able to shift their relationship with cannabis and cut their cannabis use.
You said microdosing. So for our audience out there who doesn't understand or know what microdosing is, can you explain microdosing?
Absolutely. I'll give the disclaimer. We do not sell illegal substances, but when we're talking about microdosing, we're talking about microdosing very small amounts of psilocybin mushrooms. And what that does is it helps people to quiet the mind, quiet the brain chatter. It can help people think clearer. It can help to decrease some anxiety and depression symptoms. Kind of helps us get at the root of what is driving us to use that substance. So a lot of people may use cannabis to kind of numb out from their emotions, and microdosing can help people work through those emotions. And it's a dose that's not high enough to make people feel high or impaired or anything like that, but it is just enough so that people can start to do the work. I guess I'll say it like that. Start to do the hard internal work.
And you say the hard internal work. Kind of what does that? You want to expound on that? What does that really mean by the hard internal work?
So the hard internal work is from doing this work, I have found that the majority of people have a history of trauma, either a single event, or a series of events, and it leads to chronic illness. It leads to chronic anxiety, depression, pain, maybe some autoimmune issues. And cannabis is a great tool to help with those symptoms. However, we're not doing anything to help bring resolution around that trauma or our relationship with that trauma. So what microdosing does is it brings awareness. It helps peel back the layers of ourself and our ego to help bring up what's underneath and bring awareness to where these thought patterns are coming from and where this anxiety and where this depression is coming from, so that we can reframe our relationship to it and reframe those thought patterns and create new connections. And I will use this example. So if somebody was in a car accident, a traumatic car accident, and then after they have recovered from that, they, maybe driving on the highway gives them major anxiety, right? Cannabis can be a tool to decrease the anxiety, but that internal work is actually peeling back the layers and saying, how can I reframe and rewire my brain so that I get on the highway and I don't have this anxiety or this panic attack? And that's where microdosing can be a really great tool to help people not just manage the symptom, but resolve the issue behind the symptom.
Okay. So getting down to the root cause of what it is that they have.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So, and with that, because I know that there's sometimes a fear, and I know I heard mushrooms, and I heard different things from people, and so, but I wanted to get more information. I did take your 101 class that you had here tonight, and I learned a great deal. There's a lot that I did not know about psilocybin. One day I'm going to get that name right and say that correctly. Yay! But with that, what would you say to someone who actually has heard so many different things and has a fear of psilocybin and is considering microdosing?
Right. The fear, much like cannabis, the fear is based on propaganda that we were taught. We were taught that people take mushrooms and lose their mind. That was government propaganda. So what I do to dispel that fear is to show them the chart that I showed on the webinar that shows that both LSD and psilocybin are safer than alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine. That they are safe medicines. You can't lethally overdose on them. You're not going to become addicted to them. And then when taken the right way, appropriately, under the right guidance, can actually be really beneficial for people. Not everybody, of course, but a lot of people.
Good. So with that, so with this CHS, so you're saying with microdosing. Now I remember from the 101 you talked about macrodosing. Is that utilized as well? Because I understand that's a higher dosage, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I'll quickly cover like the difference between microdosing and macrodosing, and then we'll bring it back to CHS. But remind me, because I might forget. So microdosing is like kind of like going to the gym every single day and getting a workout in at the gym, doing the work at the gym. You're going to see small changes over time, and maybe other people will notice before you do. We've had clients where family members were like, are you dying? Do you have cancer or something? Because your outlook is completely different. And she hadn't noticed those differences, but other people had. So she had some stuff had flipped for her. So microdosing is like going to the gym, whereas macrodosing is like having a hip replacement surgery that like literally overnight things have shifted big time for you. But you still have to do the therapy, the physical therapy, and the integration afterwards so that you can integrate this new hip into your life. So that's kind of the difference. And of course, microdosing, most people can take a microdose and go to work. Macrodosing is where you're setting aside like an entire day or night to go on a journey where you are altering your perception. And you're not driving, when you take a larger dose. And then bringing it back to CHS and how CHS fits into this. So microdosing can help with the dependency part of CHS. So whether or not people get CHS, if they're heavy users and they're dependent on it and they want to shift that relationship, that's where microdosing can come in. It's not going to, especially if people are in acute episodes with the continuous nausea and vomiting, like mushrooms aren't the time for that. Mushrooms are like for after they have recovered and they're ready to, again, start doing the work, the internal work, to shift their relationship with the plant and depend on it less.
So if someone has CHS, how long is it before they can microdose? So you said you want to have the recovery period first, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Recovery can take sometimes weeks, sometimes months for people. So it really depends. I like to use this analogy that okay, if your life is like a vase and something happened to cause the vase to shatter, and that could be like your CHS, that could be a traumatic episode or a terrible event or something. And the time to start microdosing is not when those pieces are still flying up in the air. So if after a tragic event, I use this analogy on the webinar, if a loved one dies, the time to start microdosing is not when you are doing the funeral planning and cleaning out the closet. The time to start is when you're ready to start putting the pieces back together. So when people feel well enough that they can, they're up, they're going to work, they're well supported, maybe they have started therapy and they've started kind of putting their lives back together, then that's when microdosing can be implemented or can be considered implemented as a tool.
So now, so a person's going through that recovery period and they've used cannabis as their source of medicine for whatever ailment they had. So there's that recovery period before they can microdose. What are they doing in between? What can they do in between to kind of alleviate whatever symptoms that they had from the anxiety or whatever it was that they were using cannabis for?
So this is something that, and I will connect you with a nurse who works directly with patients who are going through CHS, and her name is Katie, and she recommends like magnesium is great for anxiety and digestive enzymes. And there are different tools, different medications that work better than others for the nausea, and different things for the pain. CBD is not recommended for people with CHS because it can trigger episodes also. But I would like to defer to her on like exactly what she uses for people in the recovery period, because she is definitely more in it than I am.
Okay. So with CHS, I'm kind of getting back to that a little bit. So are there any particular age, like say for instance, is it older or like 30-ish or
Mhm.
what have you? If is there any age difference in who has CHS or who suffers from it more, or the symptoms of it is greater?
Yeah, I will say that the younger generation is more. We see the numbers are higher in the younger generation, in the 20s to early 30s. And the use patterns, I mean, these are people who are using multiple times a day, 4, 5, 6+ times a day. With, if they're inhaling edibles, less so, maybe 1 to 2 times a day with an edible, but we don't know what the dose is. So, so yeah, those are the people that are at, I think, at the highest risk. Although we do see older people, but I think the older people aren't using as heavy as the younger people. So that's probably why we see it more.
Okay, because I brought that up because we were talking about the long-term use of it, and so I guess what it just depends upon, I guess, how early in life they started when we're looking at long-term
Yeah,
use.
yeah,
So that's when you would
and
see the
and
older generation.
yeah, and a lot of people start using in their teens, and then after 10 years
Mhm.
of smoking every day since they were 15, they start developing symptoms. Or maybe they start using a vape pen when they're 21, and then they start developing symptoms 6 months later. I would love to see if, if when people start using younger, is that time frame shorter than if they start using as an adult? We don't, like, that's, we need some research on that, but I'm curious.
So now, when patients actually go to, like you're talking about, the patients go to the hospital when they start having these particular symptoms, is there any time that you would see that people are misdiagnosed with
Mhm.
CHS in that time?
Yes,
Tell me a
yeah.
little bit about that.
There's definitely a big problem with both overdiagnosis and underdiagnosis. People go in with severe abdominal pain and nausea, vomiting, and then they admit to using cannabis, and then doctors oftentimes jump to CHS, and it was something else that caused it. And then we see underdiagnosis where people go years with these symptoms and they don't have an answer, and then somebody brings up CHS and they're like, oh my God, it was the weed the whole time. I stopped and my symptoms stopped. So yes, it can be overdiagnosed, and that's a problem.
So would you say that that's more of a lack of knowledge or education, as far as in the medical realm, with not having enough education for providers for cannabis use, or even see with CHS?
I think it's both a lack of knowledge and lack of data. And that's what our
Mhm.
study aimed to get, is to see, like, what are the use patterns so that doctors can have the conversation with their patients. Like, okay, you have these symptoms, tell me about your cannabis use. Because if somebody's like, just taking a small hit of a joint every night for sleep, they're going to be at lower risk, and it may not be CHS compared to somebody who's using a vape pen 7 times a day. So those are like different situations, although it could be CHS in both cases, but doctors need to know enough about the risk factors so that they can have the conversations with their patients and get an accurate diagnosis.
And do you find that patients are waiting pretty much till they get to that stage where it's severe before they start mentioning it to them? More like their providers, they haven't talked to them about their cannabis use because for fear of saying anything about it.
Right, right. Well, we know that they're likely not talking to, like, their primary care on their annual
Hmm.
checkups, about that. Some will see a doctor in the prodrome phase, in the months leading up to it, up to the first vomiting phase. And, with these weird symptoms that they're having, they may or may not get an accurate diagnosis at that time. Um, so I think that yeah, I don't even have a good answer for that one. I think that CHS is most often diagnosed in the ER. I will say that.
So now, a couple of times you've mentioned phases. So there's different phases of CHS.
Yes, yes. There's the prodrome phase. This can last weeks, months, or years. And this is characterized by people are waking up with nausea. maybe they're throwing up a little bit every morning. They have abdominal pain, this weird, obscure abdominal pain, and no answer to it. So that is, that's the prodrome phase. And people oftentimes, like if people are paying enough attention, then they can stop their use in that phase, and then their symptoms go away. They don't fully develop CHS. But if they ignore those symptoms, and the weird part is if they use THC in the morning when they feel nauseous, it makes their nausea better in that moment. But then it contributes to like longer term issues, which makes CHS so challenging to diagnose and treat.
So they're not recognizing, if they're using it for nausea and it makes it better, they're not recognizing that they actually may have CHS until they get to another phase.
Or the early symptoms of it, right? Yeah.
So how would someone get more information about CHS if they wanted? Because besides Google, because we don't always want to trust everything that we're Googling, so we don't know how credible that information is. So if a person wanted to learn more about CHS and just to kind of, I don't want to say self-diagnose, but just to understand if that they're going through before they get to a different stage, where would they get information?
Since Google is so unreliable, I usually send people to the Facebook groups online, the communities of people who are actively going through this and who can share their experiences of their symptoms. So and one of them, and again, the leader of one of the Facebook groups, I will connect you with. It's called, the Facebook group is called CHS, a safe place to grow and learn. But there are many CHS Facebook groups, some with tens of thousands of people in them, all with like personal stories of CHS. Yes.
Okay, I wasn't aware they had that out there, and I would say that probably would be a great place to be, of course, to deal with someone who has it, who can better explain to you what some of the symptoms are that they basically have, and also what they went through, and also provide some other resources to be able to find that. Wow. So in your clinical experience, what are some of the red flags when you shifts from a therapeutic to the problematic, more like getting CHS?
The red flags that I see, like using the vape pens just makes me like hurt inside when I hear people using vape carts or using them continuously. I recommended them for a patient one time who was a hospice patient. We're not, and it was like a 1-to-1. So we're not worried about long-term effects of the vape carts in a hospice patient. We just wanted her to be comfortable. But the red flags are, this is what I wake up to on a daily basis, people in my messages and emails and comments, that if people, they have a history of long-term use, they have increased anxiety, increased depression, they wake up with nausea every morning, and THC may or may not make that nausea better. And then, of course, like the episodes, the severe abdominal pain, severe nausea, vomiting, that can land people in the hospital. And I come at this from like, I just want to see less CHS. I just want fewer people to come to me. So let's talk about overconsumption that we see with THC.
Now, I know you mentioned the vape pen. So what about for those who may, what is it? It's the vapor.
The dry herb vape.
The dry, So you can still get CHS from that, but would you find that it's better to
I think the risk is lower with the dry herb vape because you're using flower, right? You're using a much lower percentage of flower, 90% THC versus 20 to 25% THC. So the risk is gonna be lower. Also, the people, it takes work to put together a device and grind the flour, heat it up, that's more work than even lighting up a joint. So, whereas you can just open your drawer, grab your vape pen and hit it. So, the amount of work that goes into it kind of also lowers the risks. People aren't are going to be less likely to do that a dozen times a day. So I'm all for the dry herb vaporizers, because then you get the benefits of the terpenes, and it's a lot more gentle on your lungs.
And so with that, because we were saying a lot more gentle on your lungs, does it have any a different effect on CHS with the vapor and the pen? I think I'm going with that. It's more or less you see more of that with people using the pens than anything, because not just because of the frequency of using it, but are there any substances that's in those vapes that could potentially have a cause on reaction
other than the THC itself? I don't think so, or we don't know. Rather, we don't know if there's any difference, because the commonality between all people who get CHS is their use of this molecule that triggers the CB1 receptor. And also the TRPV1 receptor is one that is supposed to be associated with CHS also. But yeah, it's the delta 8, delta 9 THC that we see. So with vaporizer, we don't know if there's a difference.
Okay. So, and one of the last question on this too, there's a growing interest in the medically approved cannabis vapors, especially for patients who can't or choose to not smoke. What's your perspective on the role of medical grade vaporizers in safe cannabis delivery, and how do they compare to traditional methods in terms of effectiveness and harm reduction?
Yeah. I wish more people knew about the dry herb vaporizers. There's just such a great way if people need to inhale their cannabis, because it's much more gentle on the lungs. You're inhaling the vapor, not combusted materials. A lot of terpenes burn off when we light up and combust, but a lot of more terpenes are preserved when we use a vaporizer. So I wish more people knew about that. I also wish more people, if they're inhaling a lot and that's the only thing that they're doing throughout the day, like, why aren't we using a tincture, like with higher CBD and CBG to manage symptoms? I think that's a big red flag, is when people are using THC only. Like, where the other cannabinoids are amazing and do amazing things in our body, and just because you don't feel high from them doesn't mean that they're not effective at helping you with your pain and your anxiety and your cancer and everything else that it does. I want to say that another way to consume that people often skip out on is making a tea. They have lots of flour. Maybe they want to give their lungs a break. Put that in a cup of hot water and throw some milk in there, and then you have an amazing whole plant tea right there.
I would agree on the tea. I'm a fan of the tea. Specifically, I love it. And I did use the vaporizer last year for the first time, and I did find that a lot more appealing to me than the smoking. But so that I did like that a lot. But I'm thinking that was a lot better, and I heard that it would be more it's more effective and getting the whole plant as opposed to burning off all the cannabinoids. But I think another part of that too is we hear so much in the news and on well, when I say news, on social media and what have you, and even on the internet anywhere, there's more about THC and CBD. So a lot of people don't realize that there are more cannabinoids out there because they're not as widely talked about. But there are a lot of cannabinoids out there. And she put up here about, now that's something I did want you to talk about. Also too, just to kind of get that out there, about your suppositories. So tell us a little bit about your suppositories that you have, and what's going on with that now.
So our suppositories, I'm so proud of our suppositories and the work that we have done with them. So they are whole plant, full spectrum CBD suppositories with added beta-caryophyllene and humulene. And we did a study on 103 started, 79 completed the study on using them for moderate to severe period-related pain. And we found that their scores, like their menstrual distress scores, went down. Pain was cut by 56%. And then it also helped people with their, focus, mood, nausea, headaches, and cramps. And 94% said that they were effective at reducing their pain. And then the medication use was cut by 70% between phase 1 and phase 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wish that was around a long time ago when I had to deal with all of that. Oh my goodness. So that's amazing. So, and this is where it seems like where you can actually get them. So are these in a widely available for anyone, anywhere to be able to get those?
Yep. These are available online, and we ship nationwide since they're federally legal under the Farm Bill.
That's the question that I was really trying to get to. Thank you for that. Just making sure that we will be able to to get those because of that. Okay, so it's good. In getting to this though, I just wanted to kind of get to a point here in our segment where we get to what we call our seeds of compassion. So before we close out today's conversation, we want to take a moment to plant something meaningful, a truth, a lesson, or a light that might. This is our Seeds of Compassion segment, where we leave you with a word of encouragement, a call to action, or a reminder that healing doesn't just happen in big moments, it happens in small ones too. So wherever you are in your journey, as a patient, an advocate, or a supporter, know that you're not alone. Every seed of compassion we plant together makes the path lighter for someone else. So Megan, do you have a seed of compassion that you would like to leave with our audience today?
I would love to, just based on our conversation today, that listen to your body and listen to the cannabis plant. She will tell you when it's time to take a break, and your body will tell you also. So I think it's really important that people kind of tune in to what their body is telling them and what the beautiful cannabis plant is telling them also.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much for joining us today. That was a powerful insight. And you can follow Megan on social media at Trusted Canna Nurse and visit trustedcannanurse.com.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you are so welcome. Thank you. And just want to let everybody know, just today, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned for other episodes we have coming up. Specifically, Megan's going to be at our Holistic Health and Wellness Summit coming up this summer, July 26th. Definitely want to see you there, and you'll be able to get more information and hear her and some other presenters that we have coming up. So it's going to be great for you to be able to go to www.2hwsummit.com. Sign up for your tickets now. Tickets will go on sale soon, but go ahead and get on the list so you'll have information about that. And we'll be sending out information as to when the tickets will go on sale. But again, thank you so much for being here. And just remember, everyone, cannabis is a plant. It's medicine. There are multiple uses, multiple cannabinoids, and it has healing power. So just remember to keep that in mind. And thank you so much for joining us today. You all have a great evening.